Welcome back to the Foreign Desk. I'm Lisa Daftari. This week, we will continue talking about an imminent Iran deal. Is it in the works? How close are we? And why are we hearing about this in such secretive ways? Why all the secrecy, and why aren't we hearing all the details from the Biden administration, who appears to be doing whatever they can in secret and back channel ways to get that deal? And to break it all down for us and tell us everything he knows, Gabriel Noronha, who is a great friend to the Foreign Desk. You've read many of his analyses and commentary in our articles on the Foreign Desk. He's the executive director of Polaris National Security and also a fellow at JINSA. He previously was special advisor for Iran at the Department of State under Secretary Mike Pompeo under the Trump administration, and as the special assistant for Senate Armed Services Committee under Chairman John McCain and Jim Inhofe. And you are always welcome here on the Foreign Desk. Gabriel, thank you for joining us once again.
Absolutely. It's always good to be back with you, Lisa, and join the Foreign Desk community.
You know, Gabriel, you are one of the most knowledgeable and also humble, I will add, quite humble analysts and commentators on this issue right now, not only because I should say, you are extremely knowledgeable and well-read about the region, but because of your very unique perspective and your experiences sitting right there at the front lines, understanding what this country's foreign policy has been regarding Iran for the past decade or so, and unfortunately has changed very much. I mean, drastically. We're talking about 180 degrees, which to begin with is probably very, very damaging. With regards to dealing with a terrorist state, you would hope that we would have continuity between administrations on how to deal with a rogue enemy that is not only, has American blood on its hands, that's going after American assets in Syria, Iraq, and the region, that's funding terror groups all throughout the region through proxies. And of course, it's human rights abuses back at home, and not to fail to mention the fact that they are going forward with their weapons program, which is exactly what a nuclear deal is supposed to stop. So with that being said, from where you sit, tell us what is the latest and how is the Biden administration dealing with Iran? What have they done? What do they hope to do? And is a deal imminent?
Well, it's actually, I'll start a little bit with the past just because it's going to be important for what's happening right now and the future. You know, when I first moved to worked in Congress 8 years ago, Iran policy until then had been actually quite bipartisan. There'd been an understanding that it was a really significant threat that we needed to push back on the mullahs in Iran. And then when the Obama administration started working their deal, there was so much concern in Congress that they passed a law, the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act, so that Congress would have a voice in whatever happened. We kind of know how that happened, how that went. Obama submitted his deal to Congress. Congress ultimately didn't have enough votes to block it. And so it went through until President Trump withdrew. What we're seeing today is some really interesting and concerning developments, especially with regards to that law and how that's affecting upcoming negotiations. So the Biden administration is looking to basically circumvent any role of Congress and by proxy the American people to understand what's actually happening in these Iran negotiations. So the Biden administration has been having sort of secret, what they're calling proximity talks with Iranians. That's been with White House officials mostly going to Oman, going to UAE, and being in the same hotels or right next door to Iranians and having messages ferried between them. None of this has been really disclosed to Congress. They've had to really yank it out of them through sheer force. And what's appears to be the case is that they're trying to negotiate sort of a short-term interim style arrangement, which they're pretending is not a deal or an agreement. They're pretending it's just sort of people magically coming about to the same conclusions on things. This is all very much an attempt to circumvent that law, which says that any deal, any agreement, no matter what form it takes, has to be submitted to Congress.
Right.
And so I'm happy to go into the details of exactly what's happening, what's being sort of appears to be agreed to. It's important to note that without the deal being submitted to Congress, there's no way to actually ever really fully know everything that's happening until the public has the chance to see the agreement that's being negotiated.
Right. And that's the point, right, Gabriel? It's like, if it's a good deal, why the secrecy? If it's going to benefit America, US foreign policy, national security rather, the region, if it is a good deal that's going to stop the Iranian regime from moving forward with a weapons program, then why the secrecy?
Great question. And I'll even give the administration a benefit of a doubt almost and say, what if it was, maybe not the greatest deal ever? What if it was not a great deal, but not the worst deal? They could go and argue those merits to Congress. They could go and argue those merits to the American people, but they're not even trying to do that. That also tells you just how dangerous and probably bad the deal
I
is.
think it's hard for the average person to wrap their mind around why our elected officials would want to give the Iranian regime a gift of a deal, and they wouldn't want anyone else to see it. They wouldn't want anyone else to check it. Why? Why give them this deal? Why want to shake hands with a terrorist regime? Why want to give billions of dollars that we know will end up in terrorist hands?
Well, I think a lot of this is because of diplomatic mismanagement over the last 2.5 years that has allowed Iran's nuclear program to advance to a pretty concerning point. Again, when the Biden administration took office, Iran was still, 6 to 8 months away from having enough nuclear enriched material. They hadn't started any weaponization activities, so they were still around a year to 2 years away on that front. Since then, Iran is now 10 days away from enough fissile material. They're beginning the weaponization process. So the Biden administration feels that it has, no choice but to negotiate, which is a problem entirely of their own making. So that's why they feel that they need a deal, because
What
they
other
don't
choice do
want.
they have?
Well, there's the option of, and there's a reason, Iran's had a nuclear program for most of the last 20 years, but never had a nuclear weapon. And the reason for that is one word, and it's or two words, military deterrence. Iran, as long as Iran can believe that we won't allow them to get a nuclear weapon and we will strike them if necessary, then Iran doesn't want to go down that path.
Right.
That's been why Iran didn't really accelerate its program that much during the Trump administration.
Right.
Was they were rightly afraid that the United States or Israel would take military action on them. So that is the only true way to ever permanently solve Iran's or prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. The alternative is also a permanent deal that actually ends Iran's nuclear program. Realistically, I don't think that's possible. I think Iran would never, the Iranian regime would never actually agree to any deal like that, including if there were, say, a second Trump administration. I don't think they have any intent on negotiating that away. And so we are left with not the greatest options there of what to do with Iran and what to do with their nuclear program. But what this administration is looking to do is just sort of a bad solution to this difficult problem.
I mean, why should we believe? I mean, and I don't have any sources or citing for this. I'm just speaking hypothetically. Why should we believe that the Iran regime doesn't have the weapon already?
I think if they had one, we would know. We would be able to test atmospheric testing if they have tested a weapon. We have I will say we have the best intelligence agency in the world, and that would be something. It'd be pretty shocking for them to get a weapon and us to not know about it. We knew about the Soviet Union before they exploded theirs. We knew about the North Koreans, the Indians, Pakistanis. We know everyone who has a nuclear weapon. The other thing is, I think we would see Iran start bragging that they have a nuclear weapon and that they are virtually unassailable at that point.
Right. They do have a record of bragging and really running their mouth. So I don't think they could keep that secret for long. You're
Sometimes
right. You're definitely right about that.
Sometimes saying things that they don't actually have, claiming that they
True.
have hypersonic missiles, which I kind of doubt, saying they have quantum processors, which they most certainly do not.
But look, doesn't that just show us how much they believe they have the upper hand when they are the ones, chest thumping, and they're the ones exaggerating, and they're the ones running their PR machine, because they have the luxury of having that with the West, where, they'll believe it. So we're at a point where you've established that the Biden administration obviously wants the deal. They're trying to do whatever they can to circumvent Congress. They're trying to work behind our backs. They're trying to give us minimal details in order to push this forward. They believe in their ideology that this is going to be the best way to, quote unquote, curb the regime. We don't believe it. We haven't seen it. They've continued enriching uranium. They've continued with all their bad behavior. So now we're seeing two actions by the Republicans in order to try to at least put some boundaries on this. First, subpoenaing Brett McGurk and Rob Malley, right, to get information on this secret deal. And second, legislation introduced by 33 lawmakers to force the president to submit any sort of sanctions relief for Iran through congressional review. I mean, the Republicans are doing everything they can to stop this, but how far has this gone? Can they stop it? Do they have a chance through these parameters?
And I'll add, I've talked to several Democrat offices in the last couple of weeks, and there's a lot of concern on the Democrat side about this as well. There's been a lot of, obviously, we've seen a lot of concern by Republicans, but it's not just limited to them. And one thing I would note is Congress. So there's the new bill that the Senate introduced that would do everything we need it to do if it were passed in the law, but it's going to be hard to get them to give any floor vote to a Republican bill. The key power of having the majority in the Senate is you get to control what gets a vote and what doesn't get a vote. And so this is an important signal, I think, that Republicans are serious about having a voice in this process, but it's going to be really hard to get anything passed in the law this way. The subpoena measure is very powerful, especially for the State Department, but the executive branch in the White House has long exercised what it calls executive privilege to shield White House officials from testifying before Congress. So Brett McGurk is actually, who is the Deputy National Security Advisor for all things Middle East, has been really taking a major lead on these negotiations recently. He's the one who went to Oman to meet with the Iranians. And it's very difficult for Congress to get anything from him, even through subpoenas, which the White House will generally try to ignore.
I mean, it's, we've seen for the last 8 months, Iranian people come out onto the streets and give the White House another option, right? Support regime change. That's all they're looking for. And Antony Blinken, Secretary of State, President Biden, although they expressed some sort of solidarity with the protesters and kind of delivered these very weak kind of verbal slaps on the wrist for the executions, we haven't really seen any sort of real outreach from the White House, and they've definitely made it very clear that they will not support regime change. Isn't that the easiest way out of this? Isn't that the third option? I mean, I posted this morning, if this is a great deal, why the secrecy? And of course, as always, there's one person who comes and tweets and says, Lisa, are you saying there should be a war? Why are those the two options? Either we bomb Iran or we let them get the bomb. And we've bounced between these two very, very extreme and dramatic scenarios, leaving that third very obvious option on the table. The people
Well, it's interesting
the grassroots movement.
It's interesting the idea that the alternative to diplomacy is war is a warmongering tweet and slogan used by proponents of Iran and of the Iranian deal, and they used it in 2015. They said, if you don't pass the JCPOA, we'll have war. Then when President Trump was looking to withdraw from the deal, it was, if you withdraw from the deal, you will have war. Well, guess what? We've been out of the JCPOA for over 5 years now. There has been no war. And frankly, there will be no war between the United States and Iran now or probably in any time in the near future, for one simple reason. Neither side wants a war. Neither side benefits from a war. The United States has all the things it's dealing with China right now, with the war in Ukraine. It has no interest in a full-on war of Iran. And the Iranian regime has zero desire to face the full brunt of the U.S. military either. So there will not be an open war because there's simply no desire for it in either political the political leaderships. In terms of regime change, regime change is something that a lot of people have predicted over time. It's difficult to obtain, and I will say it's been last 10 years in particular have been a hard look when it comes to dangerous regimes around the world. When you look at Assad in Syria, when you look at Maduro in Venezuela, Kim Jong-un in North Korea, these are regimes with far, far worse economic conditions than Iran, far more political instability than Iran, frankly. And they've still managed to stay afloat, largely because of the political patronage of Russia, of China, that have kept this authoritarian troika and really the authoritarians around the world in power. So obviously, there's nothing in life that would make me happier than to see the Islamic Republic of Iran crash and fall apart tomorrow. It's very difficult as a strategic planner to plan for it. You can hope for it, you can work to weaken the regime, but it's really difficult to sort of say, okay, well, in 3 years we'll have the regime fall, and therefore we can't take XYZ course of action. That's what is a difficult thing for policymakers in the State Department, White House, even in the Trump administration, was sort of looking around and saying, this would be great, this would be the happiest day of our lives, but that's not how we can make policy around that presumption, I guess.
What if the people of Iran are telling the White House, we'll take care of the details, we'll take care of the strategy? I mean, and who knows, what that looks like. Obviously, they need some help in terms of organization, but let's just say they say, we'll take care of it. But when you stand at the podium and you verbally say, we will support regime change, it goes a long way. And I know you worked under the Trump administration, who very bravely and courageously and very confidently pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal in May of 2018. He campaigned on it. He took action. He did it. And then he started the pressure campaign, which did tremendous amounts of damage to the Iran regime, weapons program, their economy, et cetera. And it really benefited, I would say, paved the way for many of the protests we're seeing today because of that confidence and that ability to say the West, we can count on the West. But then you have the Biden administration, which has not been as supportive. I know both the Trump administration and Biden administration stopped short of supporting regime change as a policy. And maybe you can speak a bit about that. But if you're an Iranian sitting inside Iran and you're just, you're every 4 years, you're going to have a different tone in Washington also with the regime. I mean, the regime is probably hoping to get something in the next year and a half because they know come 2024, if there's a Republican in office, especially if it's Donald Trump, it's going to be a very different tune that will be sung.
Yeah. So, regime change, and we thought a lot about how we talk about and think about regime change in the Trump administration. The first thing that we always thought about was the worst thing you can do is get between the Iranian people and their desire for freedom. You listen to the Iranian street, you listen to Iranians on social media. We know full well that they want regime change, that they want freedom. They don't want rule by the clerics. And so what we tried to do was take their side to, one thing I've always heard from Iranians is, we don't expect you to do regime change for us. All we ask you to is stop getting in our way.
Right.
And that was an approach that we certainly took in the administration. At the end of the day, something of that magnitude is a question that is left to the president. And ultimately, President Trump directed us and said in public on multiple occasions that he did not support regime change for Iran. I think that's simply because of one thing, and that's the Iraq War of 2003. The American public had a very bad experience with that. The desire among Republicans, Democrats, and independents, frankly, for the idea of doing regime change in the Middle East, it became a toxic term in American policy and politics. And so I think that's why you saw President Trump say, hey, no, I'm really not regime change. But I think an important distinction to make is that he never said we're going to strengthen the regime, we're going to uphold them. It was, I'm not trying to get regime change, but I'm not going to stand in the way of the Iranian people. And you saw that he would tweet whenever the Iranian protesters took the street. He would tweet in Farsi saying that we had their back, that we supported what they were trying to do.
And he has a lot of support even to this day inside Iran. and that hasn't changed.
And,
I think
it's
is
important to note, Trump didn't tweet in any other language other than English. The only other language he ever tweeted in as president was in Farsi. I'm proud to have been a part of that effort. So when it comes to the Biden administration, I don't think they support regime change in any manner. In fact, there was a story, which I don't know whether it's true or not, that an Iranian IRGC official recently said that the United States had passed a secret message basically saying our goal is not regime change. There's a difference between that, which is really troubling, and what Trump said, which is we do not have a policy of regime change. There's a difference of we don't have that policy versus we do not support and are not looking for regime change. The difference is subtle, but it is very important, I think.
Speaking of policies, right now we're looking at the Biden administration potentially giving billions of dollars to Iran's regime to get 3 hostages back. I know we have a policy of not negotiating with terrorists. In this case, we're absolutely dealing with terrorists. Otherwise, they wouldn't take these political prisoners as pawns. You tweeted about this, saying that you have warned against it. Tell us why. I mean, why is the Iran regime doing this, and why would Washington give billions of dollars to this regime, knowing that it'll just result in them taking more hostages?
So this is something that has been, planned for, advocated for by the Biden administration for over 2 years now. There's been $7 billion in Iranian funds, which have been frozen in South Korean banks. The Iranian regime wants it very badly because they want those funds to do whatever they would like to do with. And we've been trying to get 3 American citizens out. They're all dual nationals. Siamak Namazi, Bakr. Bakr, his father's just been released, and then Murad Tabaz and Imad Sharji. Look, I've worked on their cases myself for a long time. I feel for them. I feel for their families. There is another way to get them out beyond paying ransom. I know this because we negotiated 2 hostage releases. We got Xue Wang and Michael White out for $0. We did 1-for-1 prisoner exchanges with Iran. That is the way to do it. And you can do it with pressure. I've advocated that you can and should take all the Iranian diplomats in Manhattan who are there at the United Nations and impose really strict travel restrictions on them so they can just go between their office and their home. That's it. And you say, look, if you want to go to these stores, to these hospitals, to these fancy schools, you have to release Americans first. Once you do that, we'll have another conversation. But we need to put pressure on the regime, not give it cash. The worst thing, I think, is if you tell Iranians, look, you got 1.7 billion back in 2016 when you released 5 American hostages. So that's $350 per hostage, roughly. Well, how about we give you $2.3 billion? That's far, far worse of an incentive for the Iranian regime because they would believe that Americans are the most valuable asset that they could possibly have. And you can just imagine there would be far more Americans being taken hostage, not just in Iran, but around the world by terror groups, if they think that that's the price that an American hostage yields.
It's mind-boggling. I know every time you and I speak, it's and we know all of this, but it's just when you connect the dots, it makes absolutely no sense to jeopardize our national security and to empower a terrorist regime, give them billions of dollars to put back into global terror. They're going to put this into Yemen and to Syria and to Iraq. And we had an article at the Foreign Desk, and I believe you were quoted in it about the Iran regime doubling down on its efforts to target U.S. assets inside Syria because they want Russia and Iran have decided to push the U.S. out of Syria, and that will result in American casualties. And it's really mind-boggling to watch this, particularly as we know none of it will be stopped. Not the nuclear program, not the terror spending, not the human rights abuses, but yet it goes on. I want to ask you a bit more about local politics. I know a lot of these Iranian activists here in the United States are very busy calling their local representatives. They've come up with the Massa Act. They have come up with other petitions. How effective are these petitions? I mean, do you encourage them to keep going? I mean, how can they be more effective in getting the Biden administration to hear them out?
Look, I think the number one thing that constituents can do is make clear they don't support any type of sanctions relief for the Islamic Republic, as long as it continues, sending weapons to Russia, building a nuclear program, killing Iranians in the streets, supporting terrorism around the world. As long as the Islamic Republic is the kind of regime we see today, there should never be sanctions relief, and we have to increase pressure. That's the most important thing. If lawmakers all collectively understand that their constituents have a certain view on this and they feel very strongly about it, it makes it politically difficult for them to support the Biden administration's policy or any deal that comes before them. Um, Again, I think the most important thing that Congress can do, and has to a certain degree done so far the last 2 years, has been to prevent the deals that the Biden administration has tried to do. I'm very proud of my part to help kill the effort to go back into the JCPOA. I think when that was happening, one thing that was hard was the Iranian diaspora wasn't that activated yet at the time. And so I felt like it was sort of me yelling against the wind. And then since the Masa Amini revolution, what we've seen is thousands and thousands of Iranians calling their congressmen, calling their senators. And I've heard it from congressional staff. They say, this is a completely different landscape we're in now.
Right.
And we couldn't imagine supporting going back into the JCPOA precisely because of all the public outcry from the Iranian community against these deals.
Right. So in order, I mean, you just sparked a thought. I mean, let's end this on a positive note. Let's just say a Republican comes into office in 2024, regardless of who you're supporting. I'm just talking about really a 180 on the on Iran policy, right? Let's say a Republican comes into office in 2024. You have this activated force that is the anti-regime activists inside the United States, the Iranian Americans. You have Europe. There's a lot of pressure on the European Union as well from Iranians living in Europe. What could potentially change? I mean, could the Biden administration make this ironclad so that it will not be reversed? I mean, I know that's something the Iran regime is asking for. They're saying, oh, we'll get back into a deal, but we don't want this to flip-flop again in 2024. What could potentially be the future of U.S. policy vis-a-vis Iran in a way that will benefit and lead to a free Iran?
So the good news is there's no way for any deal to become permanent unless it is passed by the Senate as a treaty. You need 67 votes in the Senate to do that, which would mean, look, if you can, I certainly hope there's a day where we can get a treaty with Iran that can get 67 votes. My hope is that's with a free Iran. And that's why it's going to be so easy to make a deal with a free Iran, where they don't mind giving up the nuclear program. They don't mind, and in fact, have no desire to support terrorism.
Right.
And so, that's certainly my hope. I think if you saw a Republican administration, you would see a complete reversal of what we've done in the last 2.5 years. You would go back to a maximum pressure approach on the regime, regardless, I think, of whether it's Trump, Pence, Haley, DeSantis. They are all one, I think, really good thing is on the Republican side. And again, with many Democrats too, it's not just Republicans. There's a broad recognition that what Trump did to the Iranian economy and their ability to project power was an incredible, incredible achievement. And I think that one thing you would see is regardless of who's president, there'd be pressure back on the mullahs, there'd be pressure back on the regime. We would be destroying the regime's ability to fund terror, their ability to oppress their own people. And anytime the Iranians are taken to the streets, you would see, I think, tweets, again, in Farsi from the president supporting the Iranian people. That's something I certainly look forward to seeing. And I think that alone, there's a lot of things that when you're in the executive branch, you can do to help the Iranian people. Not everything is public, not everything you see in the newspaper, but there's a whole lot of things that you can do to weaken the regime. And if you have the Republican administration, those things would be happening once again.
Right. Or a different Democrat administration.
Or a different Democrat.
Like you said, we have a lot of friends in the Democrat Party that understand foreign policy, that understand this is not a partisan issue, and are not supportive of an Iran deal or sanctions relief, and are very much supportive of a free Iran. So thank you for that reminder, and thank you for all your continued hard work on all of this. I know you have a lot of eyes and ears on you and your work, and we're very grateful for that. At least a sane and logical mind on Iran and and the regime is really providing the knowledge and briefings to Congress and to members of Senate. So thank you for that. And we wish you lots of luck in your continued work. And you're always welcome to come back here at the Foreign Desk and tell us about everything going on. Thank you so much for joining us. And for those of you who would like to subscribe to our podcast, go to youtube.com/Lisa Daftari. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts, and sign up for our daily top 10 email at foreigndesknews.com. See you all next time.